yourself to just gently meld into the seat that is supporting you, rooting to Mother Earth. Just breathing. Connecting to that peace presence within. And as you feel your body continue to calm, I encourage you to ask yourself a question. Ask yourself, how can I become the calm in the storm? Pondering even further and asking yourself, how may I be the peace in every circumstance? How is it that I may stay fully centered in the truth? Just allowing yourself to sit in the silence. Connecting to the God that's within. Allowing the answers that are inside you to come. And as we prepare to move into our moment of silence, I invite you to just breathe and just allow the answers to come. No judgment. No rush. No hurry. Just allowing the answers to come as we move into the silence. And as we begin to bring our presence back to this moment, our attention and our focus back to this present moment, we extend our gratitude for any answers that may have surfaced. Maybe the answers came, maybe they did not. But we move forward without judgment. And we affirm that we truly are the calm in the storm. We truly are the peace in every single circumstance. We truly are fully centered in the truth of our being, connected to that God presence within. And we affirm either audibly or silently, it is my joy. I start within. Namaste. And we continue to affirm that we truly are the calm in the storm as we enter into our time of a new Lord's Prayer. Madison.org, and you could be featured next. So getting into our talk a little bit today, I wanted to start off by talking about this movie that I recently saw. Now, it was one of those kind of B-flick movies that you hear people refer to as B-flick, and I'll never understand why they do that. You know, I guess they're a little bit lower budget, so they're not considered one of the A-flicks, but I happen to like a lot of B-flicks. So anyway, I enjoyed this movie that was considered a B-flick, and I think I liked it so much because it was just a good old ghost story. You know, I like ghost stories, just good old ghost stories. And sometimes they can be kind of hard to come by nowadays because they always like to include the gore and chainsaws and stuff like that in them. That's not a good old-fashioned ghost movie. And this one does not have all of that, so I like it. So I'm watching it, and this guy, the main character in the house, he decides that he's going to rent this house that's reportedly haunted. And he's going to do it because he's an aspiring writer. And he says up to that point, he's only been published once maybe in the local newspaper. So he wants to write a book and just really get published and get a name out there for himself. So he rents this house that's reportedly haunted. And what he wants to do is document his experiences of living in a haunted house. Now, before long, you know, his girlfriend moves in with him. She initially moves in. And they start noticing odd things happening, like, you know, the table chairs are stacked on each other, drawers are opening and closing. And his girlfriend eventually, she says, you know, I want no part of this. And she tells him she's moving out. And he tries to calm her down a little bit and says, you know, you're just being a little silly, basically. This is harmless. It's not going to hurt anybody. You're going to be just fine. But she moves on out. She's like, bye, I'm out of here. But so I wanted to talk a little bit about assumptions, because he made the assumption. Josie's asking the name of the movie. I will get into that later. But anyway, so assumptions. He assumes that the ghost is harmless, right? And assumptions, we've all made them, haven't we? We all continue to make assumptions. That person belongs to that religion. Boy, that's a humdinger right there. That person must not be any good. Or that person doesn't like pizza. Wow, there must be something wrong with her. Who doesn't like pizza? What kind of normal person doesn't like pizza? That woman over there, she looked at me funny. She must not like me. She must think my clothes look funny, or something about my hair looks funny. She must not like me. And some of those answers, some of those examples are, you know, about the pizza and things like that. Those are probably small potatoes in the grand scheme of things. But it happens. We tend to make assumptions about many things, whether we are conscious of it or not. The thing is that we often believe these assumptions to be true. And that's where it gets us. We believe these things to be true, so they become so. It doesn't mean that they are, though. I mentioned we believe them to be true. And when we do this, we're making an assumption about how someone may or may not be thinking, aren't we? how someone may or may not be feeling when we make an assumption, or how someone may or may not believe. And it goes even further than that. It can even make us feel anger towards this person for no reason. We assume that he or she is thinking or feeling a certain way without knowing for certain. And we begin to feel and then radiate out anger sometimes. We can radiate out hurt feelings, or just whatever comes to us in that moment. Again, all on assumption. Now, in Don Miguel Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements, he mentions assumptions. And he even dedicates an entire agreement, an entire chapter on making assumptions. The chapter is titled as such, Don't Make Assumptions. I feel that we could likely avoid so much strife if we just stop making assumptions. Now, on the flip side of this, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that you'll likely never make another assumption. Assumptions just happen to be a part of our human experience. But what we can do is catch ourselves when we're doing it. And that is going to be the golden ticket, is to catch yourself when you're doing it, to become aware of when you are doing it. Because within that awareness is freedom, and within that awareness is spiritual growth. And that awareness is with anything, right? It's how we begin to break habits that may or may not serve us. It's how we are, with successful communication. Lots of things as having an awareness. So now I want to talk about why it is that we may make a lot of these assumptions in the first place. One of these may stem from the fact that many of us can sometimes be afraid to ask questions, right? Our natural state is one of peace. Our natural state within spirit is one of peace. And in order to keep alignment with that, we're going to do anything and everything necessary often to keep that peace, to keep that alignment, that natural alignment of what it is that feels good and that feels right. It doesn't feel right when we move out of alignment with our natural state. So we tend to avoid those situations in which we consciously or subconsciously feel or know may knock us out of that alignment. And to ask questions can make us feel further from peace, because I think oftentimes we fear any confrontation that could arise from some of those questions, right? Sometimes others may make an assumption based upon our questions. It can just snowball. Assumptions that maybe they aren't explaining themselves correctly. Well, you're asking me questions. Am I not a good communicator? Am I not explaining myself well? Or they may, maybe we assume that they're going to feel we disagree with them. Whatever the case may be. So we then often again assume that our questions may lead to a situation that feels anything but pleasant. Now, my mother-in-law, I remember at one point she was so irritated. And we said, well, I was asking her, well, Shirley, what's wrong? She said, that doctor. I'm sitting in there and he's speaking over my head and I don't understand a thing he said. And I'm like, well, Shirley, did you ask him questions? Did you tell him you didn't understand and ask him to clarify himself? Well, no, I didn't want to offend him. I didn't want to act like he didn't know what he was talking about. She assumed by asking questions that this is where that would lead. Now, while it's certainly possible that our questions could cause a little bit of conflict, it's also certainly possible that they won't. I've learned so far in the field of ministry that asking questions actually prevents so much unnecessary worry, unnecessary confusion, conflict, and assumptions. We just have to be willing to do it. We have to be willing to step out of our comfort zones to do this, because it is what puts us back into alignment with the divine within. And it's what brings us together and removes us from that place of making assumptions without the knowledge to back it. And when I say without the knowledge to back it, I mean without the knowledge of, what we're assuming is actually really true. And I don't think there's any one of us out there right now that is not aware of what is going on and what's happening in our current events right now. Do you think assumptions maybe had a part to play with everything that's happening? The assumption that because someone is different than me, they don't deserve the same treatment as someone else. Or because that person's skin color is different than my own, because that person didn't grow up in the same neighborhood surrounded by the same people. They don't deserve the same treatment as me, and that those that are just like me deserve. That this person doesn't deserve to live in the same world that I live in, and therefore can't be allowed to do so. Do you think that perhaps, for just a moment, these assumptions and more played into what has happened and continues to happen right now in our current events? What if questions had at first been asked? What if one had asked Ahmaud Arbery what his favorite color was? Perhaps what his favorite food was. Maybe asked him what his grandparents were like. Which cartoon character he loved the most growing up. Was he scared on his first day of grade school? Who was his first crush? What was his favorite flavor of soda? What about George Floyd? What was his favorite movie as a child? His favorite subject in school? Did he prefer chocolate or did he prefer vanilla? If he could have done anything in this life, what would it have been? What were his passions? Do you think that maybe, just maybe assuming that someone who doesn't look like me loves the same types of people I love, has the same financial investments I have, lives in the same kind of house, has attended the same schools or grew up in the same neighborhoods, has the same color of skin, grew up in the U.S., worships the same God? It could be anything. Do you think that assuming that those people don't deserve the same thing that I deserve might just knock me out of alignment of my true nature? That it might just stretch that cord that connects me to the God within to where I am here and that God is way out there. And I'm not saying that God is outside of oneself, but perhaps buried to the point that I'm having issue in remembering my connection to it. To remember who or what it is that I truly am. Maybe, just maybe, we need to gather more facts before making random assumptions of those things that we only think are true. Now, Don Miguel Ruiz also talks about finding your voice. Now, my parents, and I'm sure they're watching today, so y'all are going to have to excuse me and please welcome me into your home next week. But anyway, my parents own an Airstream camper, and a couple of years ago, they received a call from the storage facility where they kept it stored that it had been stolen. As far as they understood, somebody had broken into the storage facility, just backed up, and towed their camper away. Now, the owner of that facility had not done his part in keeping the facility secured, and it made it easy for somebody to just break in. Now, the camper was finally recovered, but it took a few weeks, and during the time it was gone, my parents continued to pay the storage facility. They continued to pay the storage facility to reserve their space in hopes that one day their camper would be found or they would get a new one and it would need to be stored. And they would appear to be angry every time they made a payment because they would tell me, well, the man's never offered us a true apology. He's never offered to hold our space for us free of charge, knowing that he hadn't kept the place secured. He's never once mentioned to help us pay our deductible to either get a new one or to get the other one fixed if it's found. And I'd ask my parents, well, why don't you just say something to him? Tell the man what you're thinking. I even asked for his phone number, but they wouldn't give it to me, but that's another story. But in reality, they never knew whether or not he'd continue to hold their space for them at no charge or to help them pay their deductible because they never asked. They assumed he wouldn't. They didn't want to anger the man for fear he'd just just wipe his hands and let their space go. They're like, well, we need somewhere to hold our camper. But do you think it might have gone differently if instead of assuming, they'd found their voice and told that man how they felt it wasn't right? Maybe the owner was assuming that they were okay with everything, given that they kept paying without asking questions. It's a vicious circle, isn't it, when we make assumptions, when we're afraid to ask questions, and when we can't seem to find our voice. And again, I feel this all falls back onto us not wanting to move out of our comfort zones. The power of the voice, the power of the throat chakra. In fact, power is one of our Unity 12 powers, and guess where it's found? It's found on the root of the tongue. It's a powerful force when we use it. Now, Acts 1:8 of the Bible states, "Ye shall receive power when the Holy Spirit is come upon you." Charles Fillmore reminded us that spirit is God as the moving force in the universe, principle as the breath of life in all creation, the principle of life, creative intelligence, and life. Now, sometimes I think we're afraid to use it because we fall into making assumptions about ourselves. We fall into the trap of thinking, well, my voice doesn't matter. This one voice can't make a difference. It doesn't matter. Nothing could be further from the truth. Your one voice can make all the difference in the world. Your one voice can make change for an entire generation of people and for the generations to come. Over 60 years ago, Rosa Parks was asked by the bus driver to get up out of her seat. She turned around, she looked at the bus driver, and she said no. She was arrested and she was fined, but the chain of events that were triggered from her arrest changed the United States. She found her voice, and with it, she brought about change that otherwise may have never happened, at least not probably in the same way. Now, assumptions are often based on perception, aren't they? They're based on something we think must be true by what we have perceived with our human senses. That person looks different, so he or she must be different. No. So today I invite you to find your voice. I invite you to ask questions because your voice matters. Your questions matter. And it's also likely going to make you feel a little bit better because it's going to make you feel more in alignment when you remember that assumption is far too often not fact. So back to the ghost movie I mentioned in the beginning. The main character found that the assumption he made was a bad one. It resulted in one ticked off ghost that flung him across the room and eventually out through a glass door. Needless to say, he got out of there pretty quickly. And unfortunately, we never did find out whether or not he got his book written, much less published. Now I'm going to assume here a little bit. I'm going to assume and say that I like to say that he did. But in reality, it may actually not be true. And now I want to leave you with the words of Myrtle Fillmore. Now I'm going to be reading out of a new Unity booklet called The Comfort of Prayer. It's an excellent little booklet, so if you don't have one, we'll probably soon have them in the bookstore, or of course you can get one from unity.org. But I want to share one of Myrtle Fillmore, our co-founder Myrtle Fillmore's prayers. She titled it, "My Love to Thee." The hours I've spent with Thee, dear Lord, are pearls of priceless worth to me. My soul, my being merge in sweet accord in love for Thee, in love for Thee. Each hour a pearl, each pearl a prayer, binding Thy presence close to me. I only know that Thou art there, and I am lost in Thee. O glorious joys that thrill and bless, O visions sweet of love divine. My soul is rapturous bliss, can ill express that Thou art mine, O Lord, Thou art mine. Namaste, my friends. I hope you have a wonderful week. And I said that as if I'm actually about to walk off the platform, which I'm not, so. Okay, so now I would like to invite you to, remember our youth ed that's still taking place at this time. We want to remember our youth and the future of Unity. So I invite you to join me in a blessing to our Children and Youth Ed Department. Children and Youth Ed Department, we love you, we bless you, we appreciate you, and we behold the Christ you are. And now is the time when we move into our offertory. And while you're preparing your tithes and your gifts, I remind you to look on the calendar and just kind of look at our online Zoom events. As far as I know, most of those are going to continue despite the fact that we're back open again in person. So still continue to watch the calendar and to keep an eye on all of our events, because we still want to make sure that you are feeling that connection to your community, whether you are physically here or watching us online. And I also invite you to remember that Silent Unity is standing by 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for your prayer. So please give them a call if you feel like you need prayer at any time. They are wonderful and they are certain to hold you in prayer. So I'd also like to invite you to now please take your tithes and offerings in your hand or place them over your heart as we say together our offertory blessing. Divine love, through me, blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. Thank you, God. And I would like to invite now our virtual ushers to please come forward as we sing our offertory song, I Am So Blessed.